presenting, and this webinar is hosted through the Infrastructure Technical Assistance Facility, European Union funded ITAF, or Infrastructure Technical Assistance Facility, in collaboration with the National Treasury as well as the National School of Governance. Welcome to all of you once more. Together with me today, I have two expert panelists who will be doing presentations. First of all, I'm going to welcome Mr. Linda Kutle-Hlatshwayo, who is a Senior Transaction Advisor at GTEC at the National Treasury, also imminently forming part of IFISA. That is the Infrastructure Finance and Implementation Support Agency. Welcome, Linda Kutle. And then also Mr. Shahid Ali. Shahid is the head of project development at the Development Bank of Southern Africa. Welcome, Shahid.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you to the two of you taking out the time to join us this morning. We're looking forward to your inputs. Without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to our first panelist, Mr. Lindo Kutle-Hlatshwayo, to share his insights. Lindo will be focusing through his experience over the years at National Treasury and his involvement with the PPP framework and the PPP regulations. He will be sharing the key aspects related to the revised PPP regulations published in 2025. Over to you, Lindo.
Thank you very much, Kevin, and good day to everyone on the call. Kevin has already introduced me as Ulindo Kutle. Maybe just to indicate, Kevin, that IFISA is already here. It's not imminent. It's already here, and we are IFISA is made up of former infrastructure fund from the DBSA, as well as the PPP unit and the Neighborhood Development Program of the National Treasury. So all those units have come together to form IFISA, which is now the PPP unit is now housed in that program management office, which the intention is just to combine these units to provide to support to the National Treasury's efforts to improve infrastructure spending, as well as the delivery outcomes, while fast-tracking the infrastructure provision and the maintenance of that infrastructure. So that's basically the intention of IFISA, where the PPP unit is now housed, which started on the 1st of April in terms of the implementation and the establishment of the program management office. So today I'm going to be looking at the amendments to the PPP regulations that came into effect from the 1st of June last year in 2025, looking at what are the key aspects that have changed, and maybe just to give you an indication in terms of the discussions behind that and the reasoning behind some of the changes, just to ensure that we fast track the process and enable the service delivery and the participation of private sector to increase that participation into public infrastructure. So I will share my presentation. Okay. Chair, you can just confirm if everything is fine from your side.
Everything is visible. Thank you, Lindo.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. So this is what I'm going to look at. I'm not going to assume that everyone knows what is a PPP, because I have seen and heard people saying, yeah, this is a great public-private partnership, example of a public-private partnership when they're talking about the donation of laptops to a school. So just to put it into perspective in terms of how we define it here in South Africa, we define a PPP as a contract between a government institution whereby the private party performs an institutional function that is a mandated function that the institution has been given constitutionally to manage and or uses state property in terms of output specification. With PPPs, we don't use inputs, but we use outputs where we indicate that this is what we want to see at the end of the day. And then the private sector will then come in and say, okay, this is the solution. This is how we can get to where you want to go at the end of the day. So that's basically the output specifications versus the input specifications that we are familiar with, whereby we tell you that the window needs to be here and there needs to be this square meters and all of those things. So in PPPs, we just indicate what we want to see at the end of the day. So we want to get an accommodation facility that will accommodate this specific number and has this specific number of rooms that will be accommodated, and then that's it. Then you come up with the solution, a technical solution, and basically where then we transfer substantial project risk. We would normally say substantial, then someone would ask, what is substantial? Substantial in this case, because we're saying the financial, the technical, as well as the operational risk of that facility will then be transferred to the private party to manage. And the principle in transferring risk is the party that is best positioned to manage that risk needs to then be transferred that risk to that party. When you look at the regulatory risk, that's the risk that government can take. You cannot transfer it to the private party. So those are some of the risks that we are transferring and also retaining as government. And then the question is, how does the private party then benefit? The private party benefits through unitary payment from the government budget and or user fees. A unitary payment is a combination of the payback for the infrastructure that has been constructed, the management fee and the operational costs that the private party will then have to factor it into their cost. And then that makes it a total combined contracted cost, where then the increase of that cost is annually. So there's only, and that annual increase is only on the CPI. It's there is no time where we would be told that the petrol price has gone up or the diesel price has gone up. Now we need to also then increase the unitary payment. No, that is not going to happen. Once we agree upfront, and that's what we're going to hold each other into in terms of the payments and when do we pay and how are we going to pay. So that's basically. And in terms of the user fees, the commonly known will be your toll roads, where SANRAL will then construct those toll roads and get a private party to construct, and then the private party will then recoup their investment via user fees from us, the users of those roads, and we pay, and then they get their money back. And in some cases, in most cases, the private party also pays government for that opportunity to provide such a service or to use a state property for their own commercial purpose where they're making money, and then we are sharing on that money. That's basically the user fees principle. Now, sorry. In terms of the legislation, this is a regulated process. Regulated process means that once you have registered the process, it needs to go a specific steps and procedures that you need to follow, which are informed by the regulations. Now, in terms of the regulations are in terms of the PFMA, which is Treasury Regulation 16 that has been amended. And we've also developed the manuals as well as the standardized PPP provision, which is more or less a template of an agreement that we're going to sign that indicates what kind of clauses that you need to have in your agreement that you're going to sign with the private party. We've also developed some toolkits. For national and provincial, we have developed the tourism toolkit, which is specific for those concessions, where there are concessions that government would want to enter into. And the intention there was to make available the state property in terms of the protected areas, where those your national parks and your provincial parks, for private sector to come in and invest in some of those facilities that are available there, and also to make it available there, whatever that is protected, to also make it available to public to see and enjoy at the same time. And then we also then develop some products that will assist in augmenting the revenues of those institutions. And then in the municipal space, we also have the regulations, which are in terms of the municipal PPP regulations, and as well as the Local Government Municipal Systems Act and the MFMA, which are the regulatory legislative frameworks that we are using for municipalities. And then we have developed a guideline, which is the Municipal Service Delivery and PPP guidelines. Now, that means that when you're following that guideline, you will be complying with these two pieces of legislation, which is the the Municipal Systems Act, as well as the Municipal Finance Management Act, which are housed in different departments. But then those different departments then collaborated in drafting these guidelines so that it streamlines the processes. And then when you're developing a program or developing a project, then you align with both pieces of legislation at the same time. And the amendments to the municipal PPP regulations, it's underway. Treasury is still busy with that one. But the provincial as well as the national, that one has came into effect last year. And all of this is combined to respond to the constitutional requirement, or which provides that, I quote, when an organ of state contracts for goods or services, it must do so in accordance with a system which is fair, equitable, transparent, competitive, and cost effective. So that's basically what the framework then will also allow you to comply with the constitutional requirement when you are implementing it. Now, someone would then ask in terms of how this is PPPs are regulated. We've got within the National Treasury, there's in Budget Office, there's a regulatory function or a regulatory office, which is the regulator. And then within IFISA PPP unit, you have the advisory part, which is the technical advisory that we are providing from a PPP unit. Now, the regulatory function, one from inception, which is the registration of the project. So there's a requirement that each project, for it to qualify to go through this process, it needs to be registered with Treasury. So sometimes you might find that we have a project, or there's a project that has all the characteristics of a PPP. As long as it's not registered with Treasury, it's not a PPP, according to how we understand the regulations. And also there is sometimes there will be that requirement, or there will be that request from institutions once they've realized that they can't implement that project because it has all the PPP criteria or characteristics. And then you come to Treasury and request that Treasury condone the processes that you have followed, of which you have followed correct processes in terms of procurement and did everything that you were supposed to do, but it was not based on the correct regulation. Now, if it was not on the correct regulation, no matter how much correct they were, there is no provision within the Treasury Regulation 16 to condone any other procurement process that you have followed. So if it's a PPP, it needs to follow this particular process. So I'm just giving you a hint of a warning to say, if you see that it might be a PPP, please make sure that you register it with Treasury, and then we will assist in developing that one. So from inception, we'll then, from the advisory side, we can assist you with how to apply for a project to be registered with Treasury. And once it's registered, then we will assist you with the appointment, drafting the terms of reference for the appointment of the transaction advisor, which will be responsible for developing the feasibility study, procurement document, and drafting that draft PPP agreement, and assisting with the negotiations of the contract. So that's basically what we will assist you from inception. And then once we have finished that process, then the next stage will be your feasibility study stage, which is a requirement that you need to complete a feasibility study. And why do you have to complete a feasibility study? It enables you to determine whether the project is affordable, and there's risk that you can transfer to the private party, and there is a net benefit that we will receive as government if that project is implemented by a private party or a private sector. So there are benefits that we're going to get, and it also enables us to then draft those procurement documents that we need to draft, or your RFP documents, or your RFQ, which is request for qualifications and request for proposal. So those documents will then be enabled to be drafted based on the feasibility study that we have done, which then tells us this is exactly what we want to see at the end of the day in terms of the project, and how that project, how much it will cost government, which is an estimate at that time during the feasibility study, and it's a very close estimate to what you might get when you go out into the private, when you go out into the market. Now, that's basically what then will happen. Then from the advisory side, we are there to assist now in the reviewing of those documents once they are drafted, and also guiding in some aspects based on the experience of other projects that we have done in terms of how they were then crafted, some of these things, and the positions, how those positions have been put into those agreements that have been signed, and also to ensure that we do not have a position that is different to another similar project that has been agreed, because we need to standardize those positions in terms of what we agree with another project on another project. We should also agree on another project. We should not take a different stand. So that's basically why we then have to be there to assist in terms of that. So that's throughout the process. And then once the agreement has been signed, we also have a unit within the PPP unit that is responsible to assist the institution with contract management, where we'll assist with setting up the contract management unit of the institution to run and manage this contract. And just to note that you are not going to be responsible for running, but you are responsible for monitoring that whatever has been agreed in the agreement is followed up and it's delivered by the private sector. And if not delivered, then you revert back to what you have agreed in that PPP agreement in terms of what is the cost that we have as government, whether we charge penalties, we say penalties which are not punitive but corrective measures, so that we pay for what we receive at the end of the day. So if a certain particular service is not provided, we're not going to pay for that one because it was not available during that period when we needed it. So we pay for what we receive. If we don't receive it, we don't pay for it. And if we receive, we pay. We make sure that we pay for it. So that's basically how PPPs are regulated, and the advisory function, it's done. Now, the process for reviewing, it was also informed by the time, and the developments that have happened during the around 20 years plus, because PPPs came into effect in 2000. That's year 2000. And then we had different projects that have been completed and different lessons that we have learned, and also some developments within the process, within the environment that has happened, which then led into this review of the framework as well as the regulations. Now, one of those things that led to the reasons why it led to the review was a decline in the PPP space around 2011, 2012, where we have Treasury realized that the spend in terms of the PPPs is going down, as well as the private sector participation is no longer as it was before that. And also some things that has happened within the space, which sometimes I would say from our side, we might not have handled it correctly, where some project might have been stopped, and then that also dented the confidence of the market into the PPP space. But I'm happy to indicate that we are back in full steam, and the confidence is back when it comes to that, and we are grateful for that collaboration and that working together with the private sector in ensuring that we provide the infrastructure that is really required in terms of service delivery and provision. So those are some of the reasons, and also there were nice words that were used when some people are describing PPPs. They would say this is a very cumbersome process. It's tedious, and it takes too long. So those are the things that we have to consider when we're looking at it, to say, okay, fine, where can we then adjust in terms of the framework itself, as well as the regulations, to enable some of these things to fast track the process and make sure that we align with the developments. So in 2019, then Treasury as well as the World Bank then engaged in a process of reviewing and then consultations with the market as well as the government institutions to then see where can we improve in terms of the services and as well as in terms of the regulations. And this is what the position that we finally resorted in. Based on the input from the market. So there were three things that were looked at. One was to simplify and rationalize the PPP legal framework. And then the second one was to strengthen the institutional arrangements and accountability. And then the third one was to streamline the processes in the PPP framework and the manual to provide clear guidance in terms of what is it that is required for a project to qualify as a PPP, and what is required in terms of the feasibility study that we have done to then get that stamp of approval from Treasury, and then going forward into your procurement document, phase. Now, with simplifying the process, the decision was made based on the information that we've received and the input that we have received from the market, as well as from all the consultation, that we need to simplify the procurement process by not holding each and every project through the same process. So we need a simplified process that we can implement for some of these projects that are of low value, and there are some that are of high value. Then they will need that rigorous process. But then Some projects are very small, then they can be processed quicker and do not need to comply with so many of these required things that are applicable to high value and high risk projects that might end up then bankrupting government if we are not careful about it. So that's basically why then the decision was done to say any project that is less than 2 billion rand, then from the procurement phase, which is the procurement part, then there will be those approvals will then be granted by the advisory part, which is the PPP unit. And once the PPP unit is okay with those documents, then the process can go and move forward into the next phase, which is advertise and then evaluate those proposals that we're going to get from the market, and then indicate who we put in as a preferred bidder. Then we can start the negotiations with that preferred bid. So all those approvals, which is treasury approval 2A and 2B, are now going to be for any project that is less than 2 billion rand, are now going to be issued out by the PPP unit. Any project that is above 2 billion rand, it's then going to treasury is going to do that one. Now, for treasury approval 1, which is the feasibility study, that one is compulsory. You need to go to treasury so that treasury can exempt you for treasury approval 2A and 2B. So for treasury approval 1, which is the feasibility study, then that one needs to be submitted to treasury, and then treasury will make that determination. Then the second part is in terms of building procedural efficiencies, as well as accelerating project development, as well as the bureaucracy, which is exactly what I've just indicated in terms of granting that exemption on a project that is less than 2 billion rand, as well as a project that is more than 2 billion rand. So with regards to the improving of discipline in project execution by imposing some judicial limitations on accounting officers from abandoning projects without any good cause. The reason for this one, there's been an outcry from the market to say, we have been indicated or told about a particular project that it's been, there's a feasibility study that has been done to check whether this project can be implemented as a PPP or not. And we have been engaged during that process. Now we have then galvanized ourselves and ready ourselves so that when that procurement comes, and then we are ready for that one. And all of a sudden, then we hear the project is no longer there. It has been stopped, and for no project-related reason. And if the project is stopped for no project-related reason, then Treasury is indicating that, yes, you've got all the rights as an accounting officer or as an institution to determine how you're going to spend whatever money that you have been allocated. But if there will be at any point a requirement that you would want to go back to Treasury for any support in terms of funding or monies that can be you can be supported as a project to implement that same project, Treasury might not be interested in looking at that one and giving you that support because you have not finalized or you did not go through the whole process. And the decision to stop the process was not project related, but it was a decision that you made as an institution. So it's just to try and bring some kind of a discipline. When you register the project, then you must take it through the processes and let the project or the outcome on the recommendations of that process to be the one that indicates whether the project can be implemented as a PPP or not. If not, what kind of support that you can then require from the treasurer. And then the treasurer will be open to that one because you have investigated all the options to implement the project, and this is the outcome, and the recommendation of that outcome is for you to then get that particular support to enable the institution to manage and implement the project. So that's basically what that disciplinary, improving discipline in project execution is for. And then the other one was to also clarify the roles. I have already touched on the roles in terms of what is it that the regulator is supposed to do, and what is it that the PPP advisory office is supposed to do. So now that's just to indicate the roles, because from previously on the regulations, it was not stated clearly the roles within the regulations of the PPP unit. We all knew that the PPP unit is there to assist with institutions in going through the process, but there's some roles that were not there. And now the role to approve and review those treasury approvals 2A and 2B is now with the PPP unit for projects that are less than 2 billion rand. And then the other aspect that was also then recommended and put into the regulations was the reporting on fiscal commitments and contingent liability, which is now a requirement that you need to report from feasibility study. When you're applying for Treasury Approval 1, you also need to indicate what is the fiscal commitments as well as the contingent liabilities that government needs to start being aware of, and then factor it in our planning now moving forward with regards to that project. And then from in Treasury Approval 2A and 2B, as well as the final one, which is in Treasury Approval 3 for the negotiated PPP agreement. So that requirement now is no longer done required when you're submitting for Treasury Approval 3, which is the final negotiated PPP agreement. It's now throughout the process that we are monitoring and ensuring that we track the financial commitments as well as the contingent liabilities that the state is taking on when implementing that project as a PPP unit. And the last aspect that was also included in the regulations is the unsolicited proposal framework, which now becomes part of the regulations. There have been a practice note since 2011. There have been a practice note that was issued out by Treasury to indicate and guide institutions what is it that you need to do when you receive a proposal that has all the characteristics of a PPP. And then these are the steps that you need to follow. So now it is now part of the regulations, and Treasury has issued out the guidance in terms of those of unsolicited proposals. What is it that you need to do, and how do you entertain or not entertain that? What is it that you need to put in place before you entertain or not entertain the unsolicited proposal that you are receiving as an institution from the market? Chair, I think the gentleman will then be saying thank you to everyone for listening to him, and then he will then bring back the mic to you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Linda-Kutle, for that comprehensive input, and I think it clarifies many questions. If I have neglected to maybe make these comments at the onset, just to remind you, and I see it was put on the chat, that the session is recorded and is being live streamed. So my apologies if I neglected to warn you. It was on the initial invitation as well. And then also, we will allow for further engagement with Lindo through the chat and Q&A. So there'll be a Q&A right at the end. We will conclude both inputs from our two guests, and then right at the end, we will allow for questions and answers. Linda Kutle will be on standby to also assist us in responding to those. Thank you so much, Linda, once more. We'll see you later. Without any further ado, I'm going to move over and just ask our other guest, Shahid Ali, to get ready. Shahid will make an input. Let me just clarify, in our preparations for this session, Shahid being a practitioner at the DBSA, understanding this environment very well, and he then indicated that he's going to make a very short input, but that the nature of his engagement during the session would also be to deal with specific questions that are very pertinent in determining the success of PPPs. So I'm going to come in after Shahid has made a few initial inputs, and then maybe just list a few key questions that I would like him to respond to before we later on get to the audience questions. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to you, Shahid. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Marty, can we share the presentation? I think I need to start before I say thank you, right? Thank you for that. Can we go to the first slide, please? Next slide. Thank you. Thank you. So maybe just for context, I think this is important just for the benefit of everyone. And this is really just to give a view in terms of what we actually do at the DBSA. And the context is important as we proceed and as we have further discussions and hopefully a lot of questions. It will give you a bit more context in terms of what service we provide and why these services are important as well. We'll also give you a sense of interface with different parties, public and private sector. So in terms of the slide that you look at the moment, so let's start at the bottom first. If you look at the sectors that we cover, so anything infrastructure related, transport, energy, water, ICT, we fund any of that. In terms of our mandate is across the continent. It is focused on South Africa, but we have a mandate that spans sub-Saharan Africa. In terms of what we actually do at the DBSA, so if you look at from the left to the right, and this is important because we actually get involved in the very early stages of projects. And you will see at the moment there's a massive focus on municipalities and the infrastructure. So in terms of how we respond to that, we start at the very first stage of assistance, which is the planning. So we start with assisting municipalities in drafting their multi-year infrastructure plans. And the purpose of this is that they can then use this and go to National Treasury, my colleague Lindo, and ask them for money so they can fund these projects. So it's important that, and then why we do the support at this level, and this is a theme throughout the presentation and throughout the discussions, it goes back to capacity and skill sets. I'll come back to it in a second. In terms of the next point, if you look at number 2, preparation, this is actually the business that I sit in the moment, and I'll give you a bit more details on the preparation business. Number 3, finance. Number 4, build and maintain. So what this shows is that we start at the very beginning and we do the preparation, so assisting in developing the project. We then move on to financing. We'll also assist, we've got a dedicated team that actually will assist in managing the build of it as well. And importantly, the maintenance. So maintenance and how they came about, important. We actually supported one of the government departments in developing or building student accommodation. And that went fantastically well. We did the build, we did the management of the build, really great buildings, and then we handed it over. What we then realized is that the entity, remember, not all entities are created to manage and maintain infrastructure. And what had happened then, the building started going into decline. So it started deteriorating in terms of just physical lack of maintenance, but also then you get equipment getting missing. So student accommodation, you have a laundry facility, and then your machines go missing. So basic things like that, but big impact. So you spent all the money, you spent all the time, you're looking at resolving an issue, and then you fall flat at the end maintenance. So having identified that as an issue, we also started providing the maintenance part of it. I'm going to go back to the financing. It's what's mentioned there. We can offer senior financing. Recently, we've also now focused on equity financing. And this, we've also, again, over the years, we realized a lot of what we used to do is senior debt, a bit of MES, but we realized that we need to be more prominent in the equity financing space as well. If you look at the structure of projects and the support required, massive gaps in the equity space as well. And if you want the project to go across the line, it doesn't make sense that you have all the debt funding available, but you're lacking one of the key elements, which is equity financing. So your sponsors will come up with a level of equity financing, but there's still gaps in the market. And that's exactly what we stepped into. We stepped in that space. Coming back to number 2, the preparation. So can we go to the next slide? I think I'll go to the next slide and just talk you through what we actually do. So preparation, early stage, no different to, if you look at my colleague Lindo, in his presentation, you need to do a feasibility study. So ours is a little bit different. What we ask for is a pre-feasibility, and I'll explain that in a second. And where we come in to support is a feasibility study stage, a bankable feasibility study stage. And there's a reason for this. So initially, we need to understand that there is, in fact, a project that we can look at for us to consider. And in order to do that, the pre-feasibility becomes important. But also it helps define the project, right? That in fact there is a project, that it defines the project, that the sponsors have actually considered this as a real project, which means some skin in the game. And importantly, for us to support this in the early stage, we need to know that some of the basic elements have been actually completed. An example, arbitrary example, you're looking to fund an energy project. Energy project, one of the basic requirements, the land. Do you own the land, or do you have a long-term lease on the land? And this is a real example. We actually had applications where somebody asked for support to develop an energy plant, a solar PV plant in one of the areas. And when we asked, so give us this evidence of a long-term lease or ownership, and they had neither of those. And the statement was, because we think that's a good site to build. So that's just how extreme it goes in terms of what we get to consider. And that's why the pre-feasibility becomes important, right? But on the financial side, so the previous slide, I gave you a sense of the value chain. The whole idea of supporting projects in early stage is with a view to ensure that we get funding at the end of it. So it's important that, one, we address the key elements up front. So pre-feasibility gives us a sense of whether or not there is something for us to consider. And then 2, we'll assist in actually developing the project. And this is where the slide that you're looking at the moment, we've developed our project preparation offering a bit more over the years. So we've been doing this for many years. And it's no different to what my colleague Lindo said. So learnings over the years. And this has resulted in us looking at the business slightly differently. And what we have is 2 parts to the business. So one is the project preparation. Essentially, that's the funding part of it. So the actual funding required to develop the bankable feasibility studies will sit on the project preparation unit. Once it has been completed, I've mentioned the process we've got to follow. It gets handed to a different team. It's a project development unit, and that's where it gets executed. So procurement of service providers, feasibility studies, and so forth. And if you look at the previous slide, so this is a full value chain again. We start from the very basics. We help develop, and then from here, post the project development unit, it will go on to financing. Can we go on to the next slide, please, Marty? Thank you. So I think this is the key, one of the key elements to consider. So if you look at this slide, what it gives you the full life cycle, your pre-feasibility, bankable feasibility, what I mentioned earlier, the capital raising, financial close. So important, to get to the right, you need to do what's on the left. Also important in terms of, so what do we actually support and what do we provide? So the project information memorandum, and what constitutes a project information memorandum, that's exactly what we look at. And important elements in that. One, a technical assessment of the underlying project. So what is the technology using? I'm going to use energy again as an example, just easier. Is it a solar? Is it wind? And who's providing technology? What are the costings of that? So when a pre-feasibility just gives a sense of high-level estimates, also in terms of what's your offtake. So it's great to have a project, but you need to have a sense of, okay, we have an offtake. What we do then is actually unpack that and detail each of the elements, technical elements, look at the design studies as well. Look at the second key element will be the financial element, the financial model. Very, very important. Developing a financial model. The inputs into the financial model, understanding what the inputs are, understanding what the assumptions are, what is the offtake. So working off energy project, a tariff. So what's your target tariff? What is your costing? Keep in mind that this all has to be financed. So what are your financing costs? What are the lender requirements? These are important details. So even if we've got examples across the years where we get representations of what is called a financial model. And often it's a one-page Excel spreadsheet. And what we've got to do is actually explain that this is not, and for good reason. Some developers, good idea, not seasoned in this particular area. And we've got to actually take that and explain what's required. So building in what the lenders require upfront, your cover ratios, what the cover ratios should be, what is reasonable for a particular sector. If you don't build all these things in, you can do this entire exercise and the end result is absolutely nothing because the lenders won't touch it. So remember, it's not about only the lenders. So why do you need the lenders? So you can enable the project. Going back to the first point, it's about building the infrastructure. You need the financing for it as well. So all these blocks have to be in place to get a result. In terms of, maybe just to touch on legal and regulatory, I mentioned the land as an example. That's a real example, but also a level of study completed on a particular piece of land. That's also important in terms of if you're building a solar farm, is it in an area where there's sufficient sunlight? So an irradiation study completed at a particular level, can we consider this? There's some basic blocks that we need in place. If you go to triple Ps specifically, you already have the building blocks. My colleague Linda explained the process. It's a defined process. So the question is, if you have a defined process, in theory, it should be easier. And maybe that's part of the discussion we can have as we progress on this call. And that's the idea behind this. Let's get a sense of, so if you have all the building blocks, we know what's required. Why do we still struggle to get projects across the line? And if we understand that, there must be a solution for it as well. And there's a solution for everything. It's just how we actually approach it and are we willing to consider options that are available. And in this regard, I want to come back to the private sector role, very, very important as well. And when we speak of public-private partnerships, outside of a definition of Lindo, it's a broader perspective as well, understanding the expectations and the roles and responsibilities on both sides, and what you can achieve if you leverage both sides. Yeah, and I think that's my last slide. Martin, you can go to the next slide. So Kevin, I think that's just maybe a background, a brief overview. And sure. As you said earlier, I really want you to be interactive. Sure. Let's go to examples. I'm hoping the audience will put forward questions, issues they're struggling with, and hopefully we can address some of those. Thanks, Kevin.
Sure. Thank you very much, Shahid. I think we're gonna allow the audience to also interact with you. There's a few questions that I also maybe let me shoot off first with maybe one or two questions to you in particular from my side. I think one of the key challenges that we're facing, and I think I must commend you in terms of, if you look at your project preparation side, if one looks at international best practice, we tend to sometimes take a bit of a shortcut and dive into the feasibility studies without doing enough preparatory work in understanding the project and the potential success of the project, and spend a lot of resources on feasibility studies without applying our minds adequately in the high-level assessment and screening of the project at the onset. And I think you guys are actually really doing that extremely well in terms of making sure that there's proper pre-feasibility or proper screening of the project. I just want you to maybe just also comment before the audience comes in a bit later on maybe in your experience some of the key institutional and or governance challenges, especially around capacity and understanding of the process, from your experience, that we face, especially in this space. If you can just maybe comment on that for now.
Thanks, Kevin. And I think this is common across the public sector. So we deal across private and public sector in particular. So if you look at the scales of projects and real impact projects, they sit in the public sector space. And if you want to move this along, key, absolutely key, and this is through years of experience. This is not theory. This is genuine, actual experience on transactions. It's skills and capacity. So, and both of those elements are important. So it's you can have capacity, but you don't have the right skill sets. You're stuck again. And let me just unpack that a bit further. So if you're looking at a triple P, let's go back to triple Ps. Even though you got support from National Treasury, from GTEC, and they do fantastic work and do some of the heavy lifting in the projects as well. Guidance is fantastic as well. But that's just one element. What we shouldn't forget is that the project is always owned by the entity. So public sector, it's going to be a government department, national, provincial, municipal. And that's one of the key elements. The project is always owned by the entity. Everybody else, including DBSA, we will provide support, assistance, funding to move the project on, absolutely. But you need the entity to be on board. And what does it mean to be on board? It is getting the right skill sets and the capacity. So this can never be a function or a part-time function. What we've seen often is that a department, an entity will start a project and they'll have a small team of people allocated to run the project. These are not dedicated people to the project. These are people who have daily jobs, who do every other function in the entity. And in addition to that, they're performing the function of running a triple P from within the department. That does not work. If you look at the projects that have been successful, it's dedicated team, and dedicated means to the particular project. And if you go one step further, it's making sure that you understand the process, you understand what's required of you, you understand the interface with GTEC, you understand the interface within the department, what's required from department perspective. So whoever the principal is, it's the ability to go to a principal and say, I need this decision, this is where the issue is, and this is what's required to move the project along. And importantly, I think solutioning as well, and maybe I'll touch on this a bit more a bit later. We understand that not every entity is geared to have a triple P unit embedded in the entity. But, departments are not, government entities are not set up to do this, and rightly so. Each government department, each entity has a particular mandate. Triple Ps are not, or project finance, not necessarily one of them. And that's also fine. The question is, so how do we resolve for that? And it's been done before. So everything I'm saying is not you. It's what has been done before, successful triple Ps. You will see it's dedicated teams getting a right advisor on board to assist them in the process. And then you start seeing results. So Kevin, just maybe that was a highlight in terms of maybe a response. Quite happy to take more questions.
Sure. Thanks very much, Shahid, for that input. Maybe just another one from me. I see there's at least a stream of questions coming through from the audience, but another one from me before we take the audience questions is the private sector, well, the players in the market, and it links to the previous question. The players in the market are keen, and when we say players, we're looking at financiers, lenders, developers, the private parties in the PPP space are keen to know that the projects that we take to the market, that the public sector or the government players have a keen understanding and of what the processes entail, and we know what we're doing as government. Just one or two comments on that, and maybe your experience on this front.
Sure, Kevin. So I think it's an important element. I made this comment earlier in terms of leveraging the public sector, the private sector participation, and leveraging the skills and what the private sector has to offer. but it's also confidence level that you've got to make sure that you build into the private sector and making sure you maintain that. And I'll explain that as well. So private sector in terms of, and this is from a background, in the past life, I used to be at an investment bank. So I can tell you, we used to work with developers quite often. So from a lender perspective, developers come to you for funding to back a project. The very early stages, they responding to a project and they're saying, can you give us letters of interest that you will consider funding this project? And even at that stage, we need a level of information to consider whether or not we can support a particular sponsor. Importantly, the sponsors that we speak of, the private sector sponsors, they put a lot of time and money, so lots of resources into responding to whether it's triple Ps or any other project. There's a real cost to this. It's not, and it's quite extensive. So if you just think about it, if you want to put up, in a basic example, a student accommodation or an office accommodation for, and we've got quite a few of those in the public sector. To respond to that is understanding, so what is the build requirement? What is the costing that goes with it? What is the regulatory environment? Who's providing the land? Typically government. The support for the particular building in terms of resources, water, electricity. Look at the ICT element on it. All of those elements, if you start looking at the details, you need technical expertise to understand how to interface, what's required, understanding what's the definition, responding to what's required, and then interfacing with every other person on the project. This is just early stage time and money spent by the private sector. And this is important to understand because when the project doesn't progress, it's actually a real lost money. It's not a case of we pull a few people from somewhere in the business and they're doing this. It's dedicated teams. The point I made earlier, why is it important that government entities also have dedicated teams? If you want to see success, this is what it takes. And that's exactly the element. Private sector, understanding what their role is and what they can bring to the table. And let's not discount that. There's sometimes a view that, and I don't know, it's a fear of some sort. The private sector is always out to, they're definitely out to make money, make no mistake about that. And that is their function. It's a value add. They do have a value add and it's leveraging that, right? But also understand dynamics on that side. So when we go to the market to all these projects and we don't proceed with them, it has a real impact. So the next time you come with a project to the market, you're not going to get many people responding, or you're not going to get the sponsors, the developers that you actually want to respond, the seasoned people, because there's many other benefits come with it as well. You can actually unpack that a bit further and saying, well, if you get seasoned developers, one of the requirements you bring in an element of local participation, and that's always now a requirement for us. So how do you do that? Seasoned developers, training, skills, upgrade in a particular area. Lots of, and then those developers or those bigger developers look at how they subcontract to in a local area, and those subcontractors become entities on their own at some point in time. So lots of benefits that can flow from this. But again, if we don't go to the market and we don't proceed, there is aside from the cost impact, which is real, there's also a confidence level that starts dropping. The market is not confident about next time you come to the market. What's good is my colleague Lindo mentioned that departments now starts a project. There must be accountability from the accounting officer. Why is the project being abandoned? That's absolutely important. So it's good to have that. It's also executing against it in terms of there must be consequences. If there's no good reason, there must be a reason, explanation for that. Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks, Shade. Thanks for that response. I've looked at a couple of questions coming from the floor, and I'm going to see how we deal with them. There's a couple of them that I'm going to lump together, and I think both Lindo and Shade would be able to assist us. There's three questions, one coming from Stephen, one coming from Eugene Joester, then there's one from, and then there was one from Tabang. I'm going to lump them together because they all relate to the first one, I think from Stephen, was who pays for these studies? I mean, I think there's a realization that these studies are important. It's a very general question. Maybe you guys just want to, give your thinking and your thoughts about it. Paying for, and the second one was especially around local municipalities. We know that there's a challenge in terms of dealing with the cost of these studies. There are some avenues that can be explored, maybe in terms of some support funding or financing of transaction advisory. And then the third one, and Shahid, you could come in there also in the role of what DBSA plays. And the third one was from Tabang, just wanting to understand, the balance. Maybe you won't be able to answer it directly in terms of numbers, but maybe just conceptually, the principle of how you deal at DBSA with, dealing with, how what the balance is between your actual financing of deals versus the kind of resources, financial resources that you put into project development or project prep. So maybe I'm gonna ask Lindo first to just talk in general about the challenges faced by local municipalities and government in general about paying for feasibility studies or all these studies that needs to be done. If you want to go first, Lindo.
Oh, thank you very much, Kevin. Yeah, let me start with the first question of who pays. The institution that is procuring will have to be the first one to go to show the commitment to the project that they want to do. So it's their responsibility. Support is available in terms of the project preparation facilities that we would normally have. And I think in IFISA, we do have a project preparation facility that we are assisting. And I think also Shahid also, they do have that project preparation facility to assist in developing those projects, even though there are those conditions that you also need to meet. And one of those conditions is, what is it that you are putting in the table? Because you can't say a project is important to the institution, but when we look at the budget, there's nothing that shows that the project is important. You have nothing that you have budgeted for an important project. So that shows you want that project to be important to us, but not to yourself. So that's one. And then there's a question that relates to the registering of PPPs as well as applying for BFI. On that one, yes, you can apply for BFI for a PPP project, but the condition in that is that you need to get Treasury Approval 1, which is, or Treasury Views and Recommendation 1 for a municipal project, meaning you have completed your feasibility study and submitted it to Treasury. And in that feasibility study, one of the recommendations is that for the project to be affordable, you need that capital contribution, which is a certain amount that has been determined by the feasibility study that you have completed. You can't apply when you are registering the project for a BFI, as well as apply to register the project, and then while you have not done the feasibility study. So you need to register the project, complete the feasibility study, then you get Treasury Approval 1, then you can apply for a BFI where you are indicating that we're doing this PPP and there is this shortfall. Once you get this shortfall, then the institution will be able to pay for the commitments of the project moving forward. So that's basically how then that structure is. And with regards to, I think the preparation cost and the support, I've already touched on it a little bit. And on unsolicited proposals, it's for all projects, irrespective of the value of the project. So once it's an unsolicited proposal and which has the characteristics of a PPP, then you need to follow that process. And then we will then engage in terms of the process moving forward. With regards to Mlamli's question, where he's asking about the difference between private sector participation in the SOEs as well as the PPP. There's no difference. The difference there is that the PPP regulations are not applicable to Schedule 2 entities. So then they have a responsibility to then develop their own private sector participation guideline or process that will enable them to then engage with the private sector on the same principles that are there on the PPP process. But it's just that you cannot use the PPP process unless the board, which has the fiduciary role to play, has approved that you can use the PPP process for the project that you want to implement if you have not developed your own policy in terms of private sector participation. Then you can use the PPP process and the board adopts it and agree that we are going to use this process for the implementation of this process in the absence of our own policy and process moving forward. So that's the only thing difference is we are not regulating state-owned entities. They have to develop their own, but the principle is the same.
Thanks, Lindo. Maybe Shahid, maybe you just want to give some insights into how DBSA gets involved with supporting government entities with project preparation and project development support.
Sure, Kevin. So I think no different to what Lindo has said. It's the initial stages, right? So we expect the department to have done a level of assessment in understanding what the project is, defining the project, having a fair sense of what they want to achieve. So it's in what we label the pre-feasibility. Key elements, understanding that part of it. So if the department has done that, we can then look at it from assist going forward. Two things we do. We can offer financial assistance in terms of picking up part of the cost in the bankable feasibility study. But importantly, we can assist on the technical side as well, understanding how to, and given our experience across triple Ps, across project finance, across the understanding what the finances require in a project, we can assist in guiding that. Importantly, transaction advisors. You would see that a lot of departments that have gone to market do have transaction advisors, and that is absolutely crucial as well. So when I mentioned the skills, the capacity, part of it actually in resolving those issues, get the right skills on board. Nothing wrong with having a transaction advisor. In fact, that will assist in moving the project along fairly quickly. It also assists us in interfacing with us. To the extent funding is required, some technical expertise, it's easier defined with a seasoned partner on board. So that's the interface for us as well. You mentioned earlier, Kevin, just on local municipalities and support. I just want to mention that we have got support beyond just planning at DBSA. We have a dedicated municipalities team. And when I say dedicated, it's a whole business unit that only focuses on municipalities. And they go full value chain offering as well. And this has been a recent development as well in terms of consolidating different businesses. So we can offer from planning to financing to preparation within a municipal ecosystem. In fact, we're doing that already now. So when I mentioned one of the slides, doing planning, post-planning, you identify the key infrastructure project within the planning phase, and those are then escalated to either balance sheet funding or off-balance sheet funding. And that's all now housed within one unit. If it's off-balance sheet funding, it's understanding, is this potentially a triple P, or maybe it's not, it's a pure project finance transaction. So it's a full-scale offering even at municipal level. Yeah, I think I just want to touch on one more thing. I picked up something on the questions as well. And the question related to the debt equity. So debt equity is how much equity or debt is required in a project. So how much equity is required. It's all about affordability of the project, right? It's how much debt can the project sustain, and the balance will be equity. That's really the formula. So developers will look at putting as little equity as possible, but in order to do that, the project must be able to sustain the debt level. And this is when I mentioned earlier, understanding the cost of the debt, the cover ratios required by the lenders, and so forth. Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks, Shahid, and thanks for dealing with a question from Thorpe. Thanks for the question there, Thorpe. There's just another question. I think this is around capacity again. I know we touched on capacity, but we weren't very specific in specific areas. And I think there's another question I think coming from Tabang about showing the understanding that there's a shortage of capacity around project officer capacity in the country in general or in the PPP space. So I think the question is, how can we support the development, or how can we support the development of project officers? In other words, getting practitioners out into the market that can support the PPPs in general. I think there are a couple of initiatives. I know Lindo himself is involved in capacity building. And also just to mention on the side that this particular webinar was initiated through the ITEF European Union funding, which identified a shortage of PPP capacity within government. And the program, is trying to give, especially government officials, accredited PPP training. That's one starting point. But maybe, Lindo, you want to just maybe come in and talk a little bit more, and if you want to add, Shahid, maybe just on your thinking on, could we do more in terms of capacity building, especially on the practitioner side, and maybe, as the question is stated, more on the PPP project officer side. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Tabang, when it comes to that gap, what we also did when we were rolling out some of the programs, I remember with the health program, DBSA was also involved with funding the cost for project officers. So that's one way of doing it. And what we also then do is to say, look, we can look at the practitioners from the private sector. If there is no individuals within the institution that can be project officers for that particular project at that time. But while we are busy with the capacity, with training and for those individuals that are within the institution, but more importantly, if it's an individual from outside, we have to make sure that they pair in with someone who is inside the institution to work closely with that individual, so that then there will be that skills transfer that will be done during the implementation of that project. Yes, I agree. It is one of those issues. If then resolved, they can then speed up the uptake when it comes to PPP processes and projects that we are doing. So on the question that Corinne, you need someone that you can talk to. I think I know this, Corinne. I think I know this, Corinne. Corinne, you know who to talk to. You can talk to me or anyone within the unit, within the PPP unit. But if you want to talk to the regulator, Gertruda Brambis from the budget office will be the one that you can talk to. And then for her contacts, you can contact me, or I can link you up with Corinne with Gertrude on that one. And on the question of the reasons, Ufulu is asking for reasons why. What would be the main reason? The main reason, it might not be one. There might be two of those reasons. One is the development cost. You find that the institution has budgeted for the project, but not for the development of the project, which is doing the feasibility studies that are a requirement in terms of this process. That becomes a stumbling block, which is one. And then the second one is the perception that some institutions or some individual has with regards to PPPs. Some people are saying PPPs are too expensive and unaffordable and all these nice words. So that also then impacts, and some will say PPPs are complicated. You don't even have to start. Now people become scared of even trying to touch it because they have been perceived as complicated and all of these things. So those are some of the things that are reasons that leads to less uptake. But I can assure you, there is no PPP that has been implemented that I'm aware of which has failed. And because because whoever that we entered into an agreement with has failed to provide the services that they've agreed to provide. Yes, there are challenges. I would not say everything is smooth sailing. You are having individuals or people that are working in those projects. The Lindogushles are still there. When you start the project, Lindogushe is saying this thing is not going to work, and it start to work. And then Lindogushe is going to try by all means to make it not work. So we have such people. So we cannot hide away from those things. But when the PPP is there, it's all for everyone to see how nice and good the service will be provided. You've got your Chief Albert Luthuli, which is a referral hospital in KZN, and that is working very well as a PPP. And we also had the renal dialysis in Limpopo, which started with about 188 individuals that were treated, and it ended with about almost 2,000 individuals that were treated. So you can tell that those number of people that have been added into that list from 188, those are the people that were not going to get the service. And now the service was able to be expanded to even go into the deepest rural areas. And all that 188 individuals were driven Monday, Wednesday, Friday to Pretoria to get the services, the dialysis that they were supposed to get. But once the project was then implemented there, they only had to go to Polokwane and not drive 6 hours, some of them, to get the service. So, which means you don't even have a day to rest. Monday, you are driving to Pretoria and going back after your dialysis. And then you need to start thinking about going back again for Wednesday when you get there on Tuesday. So you don't have life. But now, because the service has been brought closer to you, then things work very well. And we've got quite a number of projects that are in place. When you look at the roads, your toll roads, those roads are very nice. And you can even tell now when you're driving, when you get to the R's, that this one is a different one. It's a different service provider that is providing this, maintaining this road. And when you get to the end, then you can tell that, okay, now at least for those who are driving those nice cars, sports cars, they even relax because the road now is much better than the one that is in the R's with all the potholes that are there. So that's basically some of the reasons why you might find that people are not, and also the time that it takes to develop a PPP. You will find an institution coming to us and say, look, we need to have this project implemented in the next 6 months because we are going to the local government elections. And when we tell you that it's not going to happen, it's not going to happen that we plan and then execute this project within 6 months. That will be the last day that we see those individuals coming to the office. In the project, it fits for it to be done as a PPP, but just because the time that they wanted this project to be done, it's not going to be possible. And I don't know any infrastructure project that you can do within 6 months, which is planning as well as implementing it. So, yeah.
Thanks,
I
thanks,
think
Lindo.
those are some of your visits. Yes. Thank you.
Thanks for taking all of those. There's a question, and I think maybe Shahid, you can come in and share some of your views. Linda, you can add if you wish. I think in the local government space, we know that there is a challenge with the financial standing of municipalities, and it may impact on, especially how, lenders look at the project in that context. I don't know if you want to take a first bite on this one, Shahid. Question from
Sure.
Cholohelo Motsamai.
Thanks, Kevin. I think just before I come to that, just on the project officer, I think just to touch
Sure.
on that internal capacity. Lindo made the comment in terms of making sure there's skills transfer and so forth. Importantly, we shouldn't forget that the build is the first part of it. There's still the operations. So you need an internal team to actually also manage that part of it. So although you got a concessionaire interfaces with a team within an entity. So that project development officer, or however you want to, that internal capacity, it's not only for the build side of it, it's through the operations as well. Typically would see this kind of skills within the facilities business of an entity, but you need, again, a dedicated team. It's understanding the concession agreement, the interfaces, what is expected to be delivered by the concessionaire, very, very important. So when you look at these offices, and it's understanding this is with a long-term view, it's not just the build part of it. There's questions just on terms of numbers, 400, 500 million. Development banks are not interested. They absolutely are interested. And I can tell you DBSA is in that space. But also must appreciate that not every single project is a project finance or is a triple P project. Some of the projects, when you start to get the numbers, it's understanding affordability from the municipality side. Keep in mind that there is a plethora of grants that are made available to the municipalities. One of the biggest issues we have is that municipalities not using the budget that's allocated to them. So it's not necessarily you need to look for structures to solution for infrastructure. Some of it is there. It's the ability to deliver on that in terms of using available budget. So when you start looking at 400 or 500 million, it's not necessarily that it can't be done and we're not interested. We're absolutely interested. In fact, that's the space we look at more closely. And maybe linked to that, your questions on affordability or a lender perspective on a municipality, absolutely. So the big metros, lenders are interested. They'll have bilaterals, they'll have happy to give funding to the bigger metros. The municipalities that need it most, so you get the rural areas, the districts, are the ones that nobody wants to touch, right? And that's really where the issue is. Delivery is not happening at that level. We have an issue with delivery generally, but when you start looking at those particular municipalities, it's really, really quite dire. And the banks won't touch them at all. So you're quite right in terms of that. So then the question is, well, if the banks are looking at it, how do we actually solution for this? And that's exactly where we are. When I mentioned earlier, you got a dedicated municipalities team. It's exactly looking at those areas as well. And in fact, we've put up a program, a partner industry program that speaks to identifying certain municipalities as pilot phases and expanding on that. And with a view that these are municipalities that cannot afford, the banks won't be interested in. They need a particular key infrastructure. And how do you structure for this so that they can actually build and use some of the funding, the budgets available to service this infrastructure spend? And it is possible. It goes back to also the commitment. Lindo made a point earlier as well. When it comes to election times, we get a lot of requests. We have the same. Multiple requests for projects that must be delivered within a couple of weeks. And that's really the issue. It's if you actually look at what you need at whatever level, municipal level, because we speak municipal level, if you have your infrastructure plan, you know what your key priorities are, you know what your infrastructure you need, then you also put in a layer of how you're going to finance that. It's a mix of what you're getting from through grants, your revenue base, and then also the third part would be, so what do I need? What can I do to attract third party lenders as well? Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks, Shahid. There's a couple more, but just looking at thinking back to some of our responses, maybe Lindo, just on one of the responses that you gave earlier, where you very, very clearly indicated, and I think there's nothing is unclear anymore. When you spoke about the BFI and the registration of the project, clearly indicating that the BFI application should only come after the feasibility study has been completed. I think that's very, very clear. Maybe just for the sake of the audience, maybe just an explanation of how the roles are being, sort of separated at the Treasury level regarding PPP approvals and BFI approvals.
Thank you very much on that one. Kevin, in terms of the roles for BFI as well as the PPP, now there is an expanded unit within the budget office, the regulator. So you have got the regulator and also the infrastructure unit within the regulator that looks at BFI submission, which then the analysis of those submission is provided by the capital project appraisal unit within the now soon to be within the National Treasury Budget Office. So providing that regulatory part, but the technical part, we are the one that will then assist the institution in drafting or in developing that feasibility study for submission to Treasury. But once it gets to that side, then we are no longer involved. It's the Treasury that will then be the one that is going to do that work. So now the question would be, is there any conflict in that one? There's none. There's none, because the regulatory part is approving whether this project makes sense. It provides value for money. It's affordable, and there's this, and the budget, the BFI also then has their own requirements in terms of the project itself, whether the project is eligible to their priorities, that to their mentioned priorities according to the circular, as well as is it eligible to for any assistance in line with the BFI requirements, which might be how much are you looking for. If you're looking for 100%, then you might not get it, because it does not they don't give 100% of your requirement. So if you then indicate that I've got 20%, I only need 80% of the funding, then you qualify for that kind of a funding. So the whole process with BFI and the regulatory process of approving and disapproving lies with the budget office. So the budget office manages that process. We then manage the output, which is the feasibility study that needs to be submitted, or the applications that needs to be submitted to the budget office or to Treasury for their recommendation.
Thanks, Lando. Thanks for that clarity. Just a quick one. I think there's a question from one of the anonymous participants, and this is one I think we all get asked all the time. What is the typical time frame of a PPP process? And Shahid, I want you also to shoot at this one. I know there isn't a single answer, but maybe just to just respond in general, Nando, please, and then Shahid can come in as well.
Yeah. All right. I would say to anonymous that the time frame normally would depend mostly on the size of the project first. So depending how complicated and how big the project is, then the time frame will be a little bit longer. But normally you would find that the time frame is between your 6 to 12 months to do your feasibility study in a project that is moderate, is not too big or is not too small, but just a project. And then for more complicated project, when you then say, come, we want to build a nuclear power station, then that will take a little bit of time in terms of the planning, which is the feasibility study, as well as during the procurement phase. We also then gonna take another time where we say we are issuing out these RFP documents for the next 4 months or 5 months. That is giving the market enough time to respond to what we want from those RFP documents. And that time, it's the time where we are not going to be doing anything with regards to the project, but just waiting for the responses and the proposals to come back. So it might also take at least another 6 months to finalize that. So it is between 12 to 18 months to finalize the project if everything is fine. And then with some complications, then it might end up taking even almost 24 months for us to finalize the project that we have. But we do have challenges, I must indicate. It is not, like I indicated earlier on, it is not as smooth sailing when we are doing this thing. Yes, the process is trying to simplify it, but it is not because there are people, the Lindokuhles that are there. It becomes very complicated when it comes to Lindokuhle, and Lindokuhle is supposed to provide comments or provide some input. He's not coming to the table on that one. He's busy with some other things. And then takes a month for me to come back. And then when I come back, I just dot the T's and then change the language there and there, and then it has to go back to the transaction advisors to fix those T's and then come back again and put it into the system. And by that time, 3 months for something that could have been done within 2 to 3 weeks within the institution is gone. So those are some of the challenges that we also encounter in the process. But where you have total support from the political principals as well as the administrative principals, the process is very quick. I'll make an example of one project that we did, which is the Prasa one. For building of those rolling stock. I think the factory now is somewhere around in Niger, in the Israel. That process took 9 months from planning to identifying who is going to be our project, who's going to be our private partner. That is feasibility, doing a feasibility study as well as the procurement. It took 9 months. And then I also have another project that I'm not going to mention, which is, okay, that one was around 52 billion rands. And this other project that I'm not going to mention is around 350. It was around 350. It took us about, almost 6-7 years. And still, we did not have any response. We did not finalize that one. Even today, it has never been finalized. So it is not how much the project costs, but the commitment that is put behind the project. So if you've got that total commitment between the principals, the administrative principals, and the political principals, then the project will go. Gautrain had so many changes in terms of the premiers, but all of them, they were talking the same language. Gautrain needs to be implemented. And that's the kind of a commitment that you are looking for when you are doing some of these processes, which are a bit longer, and sometimes they overlap in terms of the political term. So you also need that foresight in terms of the planning, where you are not planning for your own, to shine and then to do that spade or sword turning, but you can allow others to do the sword turning after you have started the whole process. So that's basically it, Kevin. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lindo. I think there's still a couple of questions coming through. I think we're going to probably let's navigate through a few more, and then we'll come to a point where we'll decide on maybe the last 4 or 5. But let's continue. There was a short question on I'm just trying to find it on the DBSA, Shahid, maybe. I think there's a general perception, from some certain quarters that even though the DBSA is assisting with project development, is there a conflict in terms of also being a lender in the one sense? Maybe just a general comment on your side, how you manage that perception.
Sure, Kevin. So maybe before I come to that one, I just wanted to add something to the previous question. So yes, timelines are timelines, but the reality, and again, I'm going to add to some examples. It is going back to the earlier point around commitment and dedication from the entity. So if you want to know what the timeline is, you start there rather than the process timeline. So there's a process timeline and there's a commitment timeline, and that's where they don't always converge. The committed entities, you'll see the turnaround times quite efficient. And I'll give you maybe 2 examples. So we have supported Gautrain as well in terms of getting to the award now, the new concession being appointed. But if you look at the process that's involved and get to that point, again, it's a point made. Same language, a very positive result. We supported Transnet in their preparation process in awarding the Zululand terminals, the LNG terminal in Richards Bay, to a private party. Again, it's a commitment that actually delivered the results. So that's really important, and that also impacts on the timeline. In terms of conflict in interest, so just keep in mind that we're no different to other banks as well in terms of investment banks. So every investment bank has got an advisory component, as well as the lending. So it's a similar case in terms of advisory cannot interact with the lending team because they're advising, goes to the market for the client, the project, the funding requirement, and the market response to this. So we're no different to that. So whatever we do in terms of preparation, and keeping in mind, ultimately, any funding provided by DBSA is on a right to match basis. So even that, importantly, best price for the project for the client is what we drive. So in the first instance, very clear in terms of what we do versus what the lending team would do. And secondly, keep in mind that whatever project you're funding, it has to be on the basis of best possible price for the entity that we're supporting.
Thanks,
Kevin.
Thanks, Shay. Lindo, maybe you want to make a comment? There was a question from Checho. I think if I read the question, and I may be wrong, Checho, on the bid awarding, I think that percentage was maybe not PPP specific, but maybe Lindo, if I can maybe just add to the question and maybe phrase it by indicating that from your experience working at GTEC for all these years, the award, when projects get to TA2A, once the procurement documentation has been approved and there's a reasonable period for the market to respond, what is your general sense of the the success in bid responsiveness and awarding in general?
Yeah. Kevin, I think what Tsecho is indicating is what was also then asked around in Parliament in terms of the contribution of PPPs to the total GDP or the infrastructure budget. It was in terms of the spend. It was around 15% before, where it took a dip in 2011, 2012, where I think now we are sitting very low, around 5% in terms of the contribution of PPPs in the infrastructure spend. So that's where we are. Hence, we are trying to make sure that let's try and see where were the gaps and what informed or what caused the dip in the PPPs and how best we can then assist in ramping that up. So this is part of the start to increase that contribution, because we do recognize that private sector contribution is important, and we can't, as government, implement all these required projects as government. The budget cannot take all of those ones, but then we need the private sector contribution in the space to come and assist. And then the question is, the environment. We must make the environment conducive for the participation, and also to show also that commitment to the process that we have started. It's our process, so we need to then commit to it and show that commitment. If we abandon it during the process, then it says something about us, because it's our process and we are the one that start the whole process. So that's basically it. And then when it comes to those approvals, and it is a combination of that percentage. It is a combination of provincial, national, as well as the local government. So that's basically the combination. And maybe if I can go, Kelvin, and answer Mroka on the threshold.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, please.
The decision to make the threshold 2 billion, it was also looking at what kind of risks is a 2 billion project, because that's a total cost of the project, meaning that's the infrastructure development as well as the operation for the life of that project. So if the life of that project is around 20 years, or the agreement is around 20 years, so that's the total cost of the project. So basically, if that's the kind of a project you have, which is a 2 billion rand, you might be looking at a project that is around 500 million rands to 600 million rands in terms of the capex. And then the rest is put into the operations and the maintenance of that asset. So that's a small project. But any project that is bigger than that, which might be 1 billion rand for capex, and then even the risk profile of that project also increases. So hence then the determination to say, okay, let's look at a 2 billion rand project upwards for a detailed feasibility, or for a detailed investigation, and then anything below that one, we can see it as a low value because of the capex that might be required, as well as the operational cost and the risk profile of that project. Because the main important thing in the PPP is that risk transfer and the affordability and the value for money for it. And the expected time to anonymous of registering the project, it's about, if it's at most, it's a week. You submit it to Treasury registers it within a day or two, and then we will then be given that letter from Treasury to indicate that we have registered this particular project. Can you allocate an individual or a project officer to assist, or a project advisor to assist in taking this project forward? And then once that has been done, from our side, it's a day. We do that, then the next day we issue out those two letters of the registration from Treasury, as well as the one from GTech in allocating the project advisor to the institute. So at most, it can be a week to register that project.
Thank you. Thanks, Leno. I see there was just a general question. I think it's more about the structuring of an SPV. One of the earlier questions about the formation of a JV. I think that's more project specific, and that's more the decision of the private party in terms of how they want to structure their SPV. So I don't know if you want to maybe add to my analysis there.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, the Shahid.
Or Shahid, maybe. Yeah, maybe Shahid, you should come in, because you probably deal with all these permutations of parties coming together.
Yeah. Okay.
Sure, absolutely. So maybe two things. One, joint venture, the triple P is also effectively a venture between two parties. So it depends on what level you're talking about. So if you're looking at the concessionaire, so from a concessionaire perspective, it's already typically that is a structure. It's a joint venture between multiple parties, because there are different skill sets that are required to deliver on a project. So that's typically already there. So it's not anything that needs to be done further. And the permutations depend on how they want to respond from a concessionaire side to a particular project. You'll see also beyond just the build side of it, the operation side. So you'll see when they say a joint venture, from a concessionaire perspective, a part of it may be just for the build side, and you'll see components or some of the participants in the JV will also go to the operation side. Also important in that construct, it helps in managing interface issues. So what you don't want is somebody who does a build and they just hand over. I think there was somebody alluded to this to another party, and then solve their problem. Because the one part is that although there are guarantees in place and then make sure that you cover the interface, it's for a limited period. Ideally, you want somebody who's got a vested interest to make sure build and operation is managed properly. So Kevin, just one more thing. I said there was a question, I think, from Stephen Pegasus. So Stephen, quite happy if you drop me an email, and I just want to understand what exactly. It's great that provincial treasury is looking at supporting municipalities, and maybe that's we can have a discussion on that and see whether or not we can complement each other. Also important on that point is multiple parties doing work in a particular area. We've encountered this across the board. So alignment is important. This is not a competition from our side. It's about how do we support each other and complement different skill sets and the funding as well through the different life cycles. So quite happy to pick up a chat with you, Stephen.
Thanks so much, Stephen. Shahid, for also assisting with that one. Now, my thinking was that some of these things can also be handled offline. I don't know on the border post one. I think it's a very specific issue also. I don't know if any of you have any knowledge on these two projects, or whether you guys are in a position to make any comments on the border post PPP projects. Lindo, anything from your side?
I'm not sure of the specific time that is that, but it should be less than 4 years. The beginning. And remember, it also the COVID issue came into the play where with regards to some of the planning. But with regards to that one, I think we are at the process now where proposals have been received and evaluated, and I think there's been an application to Treasury for approvals. So that's where we are with regards to the procurement, very close to closing that one. And on the determination, I think I did indicate how that value has been determined to James. So I think I've done that one.
We've done it,
And
there was just one on maybe I know there's been some very successful handbacks, maybe you want to,
So this is one of the things that we always, as we indicated, that the process we are also learning throughout the process. So it's one of the things that we have picked up on some projects that we might not be as ready as we would want to be when we receive back the infrastructure. So depending on the level of readiness within the institution, then a decision has to be made to prioritize the service, that the service should continue, there should be no interruption that service that is provided by the private part. So when the institution is not yet ready to take over the services and provide them themselves, then they make that determination to say, look, I think we need to reconcession this one. It's not an extension, but it's a reconcessioning. So we're not extending the term, but we are reconcessioning. And also in some projects, it might make no sense for us to take it back. It makes more sense for the private party to continue providing those services, and we concentrate on our mandate to provide whatever service that we are mandated to provide, and then they deal with that infrastructure issue that enables us to provide the service that we want to do. One of the projects that I've indicated in terms of the take back, it was that one, the renal dialysis in Limpopo. It's now provided by that service is provided by the Provincial Department of Health. So it's no longer the private party that is providing that service. After the private party has established the unit and equipped it, and ensure that the people who are working there are in a position to can manage these services moving forward. But there are some of those projects where you feel that it might not make sense for us to take back the issue of operating or of maintaining those big, what is that scanner? Those scanners in hospitals. MIR, yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. So there must be, we are not, we don't have anyone from the Department of Health that is equipped with managing or capable of servicing such equipment. So it makes sense for government to say, look, we will concentrate on the clinical services, and then they will concentrate on the heart infrastructure to ensure that we provide the clinical services that we want to provide to the community, and there's no interruption. So the readiness is also one of those things to say, look, depending on where we are as an institution, and the decisions will then have to be taken at that time.
Thanks, Lando.
Thank you.
I think just maybe we'll take one more and respond to one more question. I think we're heading close to
Yeah.
our session.
I
There's
think it's
one
truly
more.
hello.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Maybe if you want to go, Shahid, it also links to the structuring of the project, whether there's
Yes.
maybe, in the structuring government support required through BFI, maybe
Yeah.
just a general comment from you or Shahid.
Can I then try and take this one because
Sure.
it has that BFI element, and then Shahid can also come in. Then what will be important in this one for it to qualify to be a BFI procurement? One, the project needs to be more than R1 billion for it to qualify to be assessed or looked at in terms of the BFI. So the eligibility criteria, one of the eligibility criteria is that the project should be R1 billion and more. So that's the first thing that we will need to look at. But in terms of a PPP, yes, we can assist in looking at that project because energy is part of those priority projects that we are looking at. And then in terms of also the regulations that have been issued by the Minister of Energy when it comes to the private sector involvement that redirects for any of those projects into the PPP process to say you need to then follow this particular process in terms of developing the project. We will then come in and assist on that one. But for BFI, as long as it qualifies with the eligibility criteria, then it can be looked at for assistance.
Thanks, Lando.
Thank you.
I think we will
Even maybe can I
probably
just
have.
add to that?
Yeah,
Just
please.
in terms of
Sorry,
the energy in the municipal
Shahid.
space. So importantly, it's the earlier point, right? Understanding affordability and whether or not the municipality can pay for the energy used. So there's two parts. One is the financing, but in order to get to the financing, you must be able to show a repayment, right? And typically, where the municipal space, it's understanding how you can structure around this. So then you look at your market, your municipality weight space. Potentially is an industrial base that allows you a different revenue base as well. We know some of the issues are around collections, your revenue base plus collections, and then maybe that gives you something a bit more feasible, more tangible to actually fund. So it doesn't matter what you put in terms of funding. The question is, are you able to repay? So even the municipalities, if they're looking at third-party funding, they have to answer the question, can you actually do that? And that's exactly what we do in terms of assessing, understanding what's affordable. And then it's the likes of BFI coming in to assist in terms of making it even more affordable. So the BFI funding has a role to play in that, potentially back ending the tenor, but kind of more like an equity play in terms of making this attractive to third parties, taking long tenor, and this allows it for the injection of money coming from the likes of a BFI.
Yeah.
Thank you, Gavin.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Just before I maybe ask for some final comments from the panelists, just a reminder that we would love you to complete the survey at the end of. I think Marty has put it on the chat. Please do us a favor, and we would like to improve on on our future webinars. There's a few more coming later in the year and early next year. So we would like you to just complete the survey at the end of the seminar. Can I maybe just ask, maybe Shahid, you can go first, maybe just one or two final comments from your side, and then Lindo.
Thanks, Kevin. So I think just maybe in the context of Triple Ps, very successful. We know they've been very successful. I got one exception, maybe Lindo, but I won't go into that. But very successful in the past. And there was a question posed somewhere along the line, why not more? Exactly that, why not more? It offers you transparency. It gives you a look through in terms of the delivery. So for me, it's we definitely need to do a bit more, and I think we are in that trajectory at the moment. We're seeing a lot more come to the market. So if you look at the board approach, you look at Gautrain was awarded recently. There's a few more, I think, in the pipeline, and that is the intention. A bit more in the pipeline. Overall, I think just in terms of support, focus on municipalities, absolutely. Keeping in mind that anything we do, it does involve multiple parties. So if you look at a financier, you look at GTech, it's the entity that's involved that's absolutely crucial. So even with the best of intentions and the best of support, you need all three parties to actually work together. And the entity leads on this, and we shouldn't lose sight of that. Thank you, Kevin, and thank you for the
Thanks so
opportunity.
much, Shahid, and thanks for your participation. Lindo?
Thank you very much, Kevin. I think mine is just to thank all those that have been involved in the planning for this one and inviting us to be part of this webinar, which is the funders, your ITech, ITEF, DBSA, as well as National Treasury for availing us and also supporting this initiative. From the PPP space, we are open for business and we are there to support government institutions in implementing PPPs. If you are not sure whether you can implement it, I'm just saying bring one project and let's deal with it, and then you'll take it from there. So we are open. And if you want any discussions from us, we can talk to you, and we'll see each other when we are doing our PPP training that we normally do on quarterly basis. So you can check the GTech website for that. And yes, thank you very much and have a great afternoon.
Thank you so much, Lindo. And just a final word on my side. I think we're very excited to also to be in the capacity building space, but also just for the audience, there's definitely a change in perception. I think both Lindo and Shahid alluded to it. There's a change in perception. There's an awareness that the PPP space is growing, the pipeline is growing, and we can see also from not just from government side, but from private sector as well. So thank you very much for your participation today. We're looking forward to see you in the next webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you.